The generator hummed through the night as the security lights flickered across the compound walls. In the middle of the quiet estate, a single suitcase lay open in the rain, silk dresses soaking into the red Lagos mud, while neighbors pretended not to watch from behind their curtains. The gate creaked once, then shut. No one inside the house came out to pick the clothes up. If stories like this pull you in, like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling what part of the world you're watching from. At Westbridge Continental's Lagos headquarters, Lydia Carter was the kind of woman people instinctively stood up for when she entered a room. Not because she demanded it, because she never needed to. She carried competence the way some people carried perfume, effortlessly noticeable. Her office overlooked Victoria Island's endless traffic, a mosaic of yellow buses and restless ambition. And her calendar was a battlefield of negotiations, conference calls across time zones, and quarterly reviews that always ended in applause. Colleagues trusted her decisions even when they disagreed with them. She listened first, spoke second, and rarely repeated herself. When she did, people paid attention. She remembered birthdays. She approved leave without humiliation. She corrected mistakes privately and praised effort publicly. In a company where hierarchy usually moved like a whip, Lydia ran her department like a spine, firm, upright, dependable. So naturally, people admired her. And admiration has a shadow. The HR office sat 2 floors below Lydia's department. Nina Doyle worked there, precise, observant, and perpetually overlooked. Nina knew everything about everyone. Salaries, warnings, terminations, complaints whispered and withdrawn. She signed paperwork that shaped careers, yet never attended the meetings where credit was given. She watched others become leaders while she remained administrative support. Her work was confidential. Her existence was invisible. At first, Nina respected Lydia. Everyone did. Lydia greeted cleaners by name, never called HR those people, and actually read employee welfare reports, something executives rarely did. But respect changed the day Lydia got engaged. The office cafeteria buzzed that afternoon. Small congratulations traveled desk to desk before Lydia even announced it formally. Someone had spotted the ring during a meeting. Brian Carter, accounts whispered, consultant engineer, works offshore, good man. Nina heard it before Lydia stepped into HR to submit marital status updates. Lydia smiled warmly. Hi, Nina. I'll need to update my records soon. Wedding is next month. Nina forced her lips upward. Congratulations. The smile felt like holding a hot coin in her mouth. Because the moment Lydia left, the room filled with admiration again. She deserves it. Such a calm man, too. I've seen him pick her up. They look balanced. Balanced. The word stayed. Nina had dated men who competed with her, men who belittled her, men who vanished when promotion didn't come fast enough. Yet here was Lydia, already successful, marrying someone stable and supportive. Nina told herself it wasn't jealousy. It was observation. But observation turned into accounting. She began noticing patterns. Lydia leaving early to meet Brian, occasionally waiting in the lobby, the security guards greeting him by name. The ease between them felt unfair. Not dramatic, not complicated, just steady. And steady love can be the most irritating thing to someone accustomed to struggle. After the wedding, Lydia's name changed in the system. Lydia Carter. Nina typed it, saved it, stared at it longer than necessary. The office held a small celebration. Cake, speeches, photos. Lydia laughed more freely that day, and coworkers teased that marriage softened her. Nina stood behind the camera taking pictures. No one noticed she never smiled. Weeks passed. Lydia's position required travel. Abuja, Accra, Nairobi. Strategic expansion meetings. She often left Monday morning and returned Thursday night. Each return, Brian picked her up. Every time, Nina noticed. Then the thoughts began to arrange themselves. He trusts her completely. He never questions where she goes. No marriage survives distance without cracks. What started as curiosity slowly became a private project, an emotional experiment conducted inside her mind. Admiration had turned into resentment, not because Lydia harmed her, But because Lydia represented a life Nina believed the world refused to give her, so she decided to rebalance the world. The first message Nina sent Brian was polite. She obtained his number from emergency contact records, a privilege HR possessed but rarely abused. She stared at the phone for nearly 10 minutes before typing. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. This is Nina from Westbridge HR. Nothing urgent. I needed to confirm Lydia's next of kin documentation after recent travel updates. Professional. Harmless." Brian replied within minutes. "Hello. Sure, is everything okay?" That concern told Nina something. He worried easily. Perfect. She kept the conversation administrative for 2 days. Small clarifications. Friendly professionalism. She never called, only texted. Written communication allowed suggestion without tone. Then she planted the first seed. "Your wife works very hard. Sometimes too hard. I hope she rests during these trips." Brian responded. "She says they're busy but normal." "Why?" Nina waited 2 hours before answering. "Nothing. Just staff welfare concerns. Some departments stretch schedules. Ambiguity. People fill gaps with their own fears." The next week, Lydia traveled to Accra. Nina texted again, this time late evening. "Sorry to message late." Did Lydia mention she extended the trip? Brian paused longer before replying. "Extended?" "She said she'd be back Thursday." Nina stared at the screen, letting tension grow. "Perhaps I'm mistaken." She submitted a late return clearance. She had not. Brian didn't respond for 20 minutes. Then, she just told me flight delayed. Weather. Nina smiled faintly. Not accusation, just contradiction. Over weeks, she repeated the pattern. Never directly accusing, only questioning reality. Different hotel listed on reimbursement. Odd hour meeting request. Male colleague signed escort clearance. All fabricated. Each statement small enough to dismiss individually, but together forming a narrative Brian could not verify from a distance. Brian began asking Lydia casual questions. "How was the conference? Who traveled with you? Late meetings?" Lydia answered easily. Unaware, she was responding to suspicions she never saw forming. The more normal she sounded, the more Brian wondered why details differed from Nina's quiet warnings. Nina never pushed hard. She allowed Brian to draw conclusions himself. The strongest lies are the ones victims construct. Months passed. Brian's replies changed tone. Shorter, colder. Nina introduced sympathy. "I shouldn't interfere, but I've seen marriages collapse from corporate travel culture. I would want someone to tell me." He called her that night for the first time. His voice carried exhaustion more than anger. "Do you think she's involved with someone?" Nina didn't answer immediately. Silence breathed louder than words. "I don't know," she said softly. "But patterns matter." After that call, boundaries dissolved. Brian began waiting for her updates. Nina provided them. When Lydia traveled to Nairobi, Nina escalated. She booked a private dinner reservation reimbursement. Brian called Lydia mid-meeting. She silenced the phone. He interpreted silence as confirmation. Nina didn't need to say affair. Brian said himself. Their conversations grew longer. Personal. She mirrored his hurt, validated his doubts, positioned herself as reluctant witness forced into honesty. Then sympathy became intimacy. They met for coffee under the pretense of document signing. Brian needed to see the person protecting him. Nina dressed carefully but modestly, trustworthy, not seductive. He looked tired. "Thank you for telling me," he said. She shook her head. "I wish I was wrong." Touch happened naturally, a hand on his wrist during reassurance. A week later they met again. This time he confided frustrations Lydia never knew existed. Her busy schedule, her independence, how he felt secondary to her career. Nina listened, intensely, offering what Lydia never had reason to provide: insecurity. Affairs rarely begin with attraction. They begin with validation. Their relationship crossed the line the night Lydia's flight was delayed returning from Abuja. Brian didn't inform her he was out. He spent the evening with Nina instead. Afterward, he sat in silence, guilt wrestling relief. "She's probably with him anyway," Nina whispered, not asking who him was. He accepted the story because it justified the choice. From that point, Nina's lies no longer needed proof. Brian defended them himself. When Lydia laughed at dinner about a stressful meeting, he heard mockery. When she mentioned male colleagues, he heard confession disguised as normalcy. Nina had successfully relocated trust, not toward herself, away from Lydia. And that was enough. The marriage hadn't collapsed yet, but its foundation had already been removed, brick by brick, by someone who never raised her voice, never issued a threat, and never once stated an accusation outright. The first night Brian invited Nina into the house, he did not call it moving in. He called it just staying over. Lydia had flown to Nairobi for a week-long regional negotiation, one of the biggest contracts Westbridge had attempted in East Africa. She left before sunrise, kissed Brian goodbye while he was still half asleep, and reminded him to water the small hibiscus plant she kept beside the window. He promised he would. That same evening, Nina stood at the gate holding a small travel bag. She hesitated, not out of guilt, but calculation. Crossing a threshold changes the nature of betrayal. Conversations can be denied. Messages can be deleted. But occupying a spouse's space rewrites reality. Brian unlocked the door and stepped aside. "You shouldn't be alone after everything," she said softly, framing her presence as support. He nodded, already convinced the house had emotionally belonged to him alone for months. Lydia's work trips had slowly turned the place into a waiting room in his mind, and Nina filled the silence. Her first night was careful. She sat only on the edge of the couch, avoided opening cabinets, asked permission for water. She knew she didn't need permission to drink. By the third night, she cooked in Lydia's kitchen. By the fourth, her shoes rested beside the door permanently. Brian stopped correcting neighbors who greeted her. He didn't introduce her either. He simply allowed assumptions to grow. Nina learned the routines quickly: generator schedule, the security guard's patrol hour, the way afternoon heat crept into the bedroom. She changed small things, rearranged throw pillows, replaced Lydia's scented candles with milder ones, folded laundry differently. Nothing dramatic, just enough to erase presence. One afternoon, she opened Lydia's wardrobe, rows of corporate suits lined in careful color order. She ran her fingers across the hangers, then shifted a few pieces to the side to make room for her dresses. Brian watched from the doorway. "Are we doing the right thing?" he asked, not expecting an answer, but wanting reassurance. Nina didn't look at him. "You deserve honesty," she replied, "and peace." He accepted the words because they removed responsibility. By the time Lydia's return date approached, Nina no longer kept her bag packed. She had unpacked completely. The rain started just before Lydia's taxi entered the estate. She leaned back, exhausted but relieved. The Nairobi negotiation had gone well, better than expected, and she'd even bought Brian a small carved wooden sculpture from a roadside market. It rested carefully inside her carry-on. Her phone battery had died during the flight. She didn't notice Brian hadn't called in 3 days. The taxi slowed. Something looked wrong before she understood what it was. The gate stood open. Her suitcases, the ones she hadn't traveled with, sat outside. Clothes lay scattered across the grass, damp from rain and darkening soil. A framed photograph rested face down near the driveway. For a moment, she thought robbery. She stepped out slowly. The front door opened. Brian stood there. Behind him, Nina, not hiding, not nervous, standing comfortably inside the house. Brian spoke first, voice rehearsed. "You should take your things and go, Lydia." She blinked once, absorbing the arrangement of bodies in space more than the words themselves. The carved sculpture slipped slightly in her grip. "What is this?" she asked quietly. Nina folded her arms but said nothing, allowing Brian ownership of the decision. "You've been lying for months," he continued. "We know about the affairs during your trips. I won't live like that anymore." The accusation landed without impact, not because it was weak, but because it was unexpected. Lydia looked from Brian to Nina, then at the soaked clothes on the lawn. Understanding arrived in pieces, assembling faster than emotion. "So," she said evenly, "you moved her into my home." Brian stiffened. "Our home." She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply set her carry-on beside the gate and picked up a rain-soaked blouse, squeezing water from the fabric as though testing reality. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. The generator hummed. Lydia finally met Nina's eyes. Long, steady, unreadable. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said calmly. Brian expected shouting. He expected denial, tears, maybe even bargaining. Anything that would confirm the version of Lydia he had constructed over the past months. A woman cornered by exposure. Instead, she walked past him. Not inside the house. She stopped just at the threshold, careful not to step over it. Rain dotted her shoulders while she held the wet blouse loosely in one hand. She looked around the living room only once, scanning the rearranged furniture, the different candles, Nina's shoes beside the wall. No emotion crossed her face. She placed the blouse back into the suitcase outside and closed it. Then she removed her phone from her handbag. Brian frowned. "I said you should leave." "I am," Lydia replied calmly. "I just need a moment." She stepped away from the door and stood under the small awning by the gate, where the rain softened into mist. Her movements were unhurried, almost routine, the way she handled a tense negotiation meeting, not a collapsing marriage. She dialed the first number. "Carla," she said when the line connected, her voice steady, businesslike. "It's time." She listened briefly, gave the address, then ended the call. Nina shifted her weight, uneasy for the first time. "Who was that?" Lydia didn't answer. She was already dialing again. "Ethan, activate file C7. Tonight." Brian's irritation sharpened. "What files?" Lydia stopped playing games. She ignored him and made the third call. "Aaron," she said. "Yes, I'm at the house now. You want to come in person?" This time she waited longer, answering a few short questions, then slipped the phone back in her bag. The silence afterward stretched. Wind pushed the rain sideways across the lawn, plastering damp clothes against the ground. Somewhere down the street, the generator coughed to life. Brian crossed his arms. "You think calling people will change facts?" Lydia looked at him carefully, not angrily, not pleading, just observing. "I think fact will change facts," she replied. That answer irritated him more than shouting would have. Nina stepped forward. "There's nothing to discuss. You've been exposed. The sooner you accept it, the easier this will be." Lydia's gaze lingered on her for a long second, measuring, cataloging. "I already accepted something," she said. "Months ago." Neither of them understood what she meant. 15 minutes passed. Then headlights appeared at the gate. The first car carried Carla Ruiz, briefcase, tablet, and a folder thick enough to resist the humidity. She didn't greet Brian or Nina. She went straight to Lydia. "Are you all right?" "Yes." Carla nodded once and turned toward the couple standing in the doorway. "Good evening. I represent Mrs. Lydia Carter." Brian scoffed. "Your client cheated and got caught. There's nothing legal here." Carla opened the folder. "Actually, there is." A second vehicle stopped outside. Ethan Park stepped out, still in office attire despite the late hour. He carried a laptop bag and a portable printer case. Nina's confidence wavered slightly. "Why is an accountant here?" "You'll see," Ethan said quietly. Then the third car arrived. Detective Aaron Doyle walked through the gate, badge visible but demeanor neutral. The presence of law enforcement altered the air immediately. Neighbors' curtains shifted wider. Brian straightened. "Officer, she's trespassing. We asked her to leave." Aaron looked at Lydia. "Ma'am, this is my residence," she answered simply. Carla handed the detective a document. Aaron read for several seconds. Then he turned to Brian. "Sir, how long have you lived here?" Brian frowned. "I'm her husband." "That wasn't my question." 2 years. Aaron nodded slowly and handed the paper back to Carla. For clarity, Carla said, her tone professional and precise. "The property located at this address was purchased prior to marriage and remains solely under Lydia Carter's legal ownership. No transfer, no shared deed, no joint mortgage." Brian blinked. "That's impossible. We live here." "You were allowed to live here," Carla corrected. Nina stepped forward sharply. "That doesn't matter. Marriage makes it shared." "In some cases," Carla said, "not this one." Ethan opened his laptop on the car hood and connected the portable printer. Pages began sliding out into the damp night air. "And now," he added calmly, "the financial part. He handed copies first to Carla, then to the detective. Over the past 8 months, Ethan continued. Multiple credit accounts under Lydia Carter's name recorded purchases inconsistent with her travel logs. Furniture deliveries, electronics, private reservations, and cash withdrawals in Lagos while she was verifiably abroad. Brian's expression hardened. She authorized them. No, Ethan said. The authorization signatures don't match her biometric verification patterns. We checked. Nina's voice tightened. You can't prove that. Aaron spoke this time. Actually, financial fraud investigations prove that regularly. Carla produced another sheet. Security footage from 3 vendors shows both of you using her cards. Dates coincide with her international travel records. Brian's composure cracked slightly. She's my wife. And that, Carla said evenly, does not grant permission to impersonate, spend, or conspire. The rain intensified. For the first time since Lydia's arrival, neither Brian nor Nina spoke. Aaron looked between them. At this point, this situation is no longer a domestic dispute. It may constitute criminal activity. Lydia had not moved from where she stood near the gate. She watched quietly as realization formed. Not sudden, but heavy and unavoidable. Brian finally looked at her, searching for the panic he expected earlier. He found none, only preparation, and that frightened him more than any accusation could have. The following morning, Lagos moved as it always did. Traffic swelling before sunrise, street vendors setting up before offices opened. But inside Carla Ruiz's law firm, time felt structured and deliberate. Lydia sat across from Carla at a polished conference table. She wore a simple navy dress, hair tied back, no makeup beyond what professionalism required. There were no signs she had spent the previous evening standing in rain watching her life fracture. In front of her lay a stack of documents, property records, bank statements, travel itineraries, surveillance stills printed in sharp black and white. Carla pushed a page toward her. This is the divorce petition. Irreconcilable breakdown and marital misconduct. Lydia read every line carefully. She never skimmed, not contracts, not reports, not even restaurant menus. Her attention to detail had built her career, and today it protected her. She signed. The pen stroke was clean, without hesitation. Next came the criminal complaint. Carla separated the pages. This one is more serious, she said. Theft, identity misuse, and financial fraud. Once filed, it can't be withdrawn informally. Lydia's eyes moved across the list of transactions. Hotel bookings she never made. Electronics she never bought. Transfers she never approved. At the bottom, a digital signature replicated poorly. Her voice remained steady. File it. Carla studied her briefly. No reconsideration? Lydia shook her head once. They already decided the outcome when they removed me from my own house. Carla nodded and passed the folder to her assistant outside the glass office. By midday, formal notices were served. Brian received his at noon. He was still inside the house, Lydia's house, pacing the living room that no longer felt secure. Nina sat on the couch, scrolling her phone repeatedly, refreshing messages that weren't coming. The doorbell rang. Brian opened it to a courier and a uniformed officer. His stomach dropped before reading the first page. Divorce petition filed. Behind it, criminal complaint documentation. What is this? Nina asked, standing quickly. Brian flipped pages, his breathing tightening. She's accusing us of theft. Nina grabbed the papers. She can't prove. She stopped mid-sentence as she saw the attachments. Transaction logs, vendor confirmations, camera stills. One image clearly showed her at a checkout counter holding Lydia's card. Her fingers trembled. This is intimidation, she said, though her voice had lost conviction. Brian's anger surged, not yet replaced by fear. Good. We'll fight it. She thinks she's powerful because she earns more money. But power had already shifted. That afternoon, the bank froze disputed accounts pending investigation. Their spending ability vanished instantly. No card approvals, no withdrawals, no transfers. Then the police requested formal statements. For the first time, Brian realized this was not a marital argument. It was a legal case. 6 weeks later, the courtroom air felt heavy with quiet attention. Word had traveled through professional circles. A corporate manager accusing her husband and an HR officer of coordinated financial exploitation. Colleagues filled the benches discreetly, pretending civic curiosity. Lydia sat beside Carla, composed, reviewing printed exhibits even though she already knew every detail. Across the aisle, Brian and Nina sat with their defense counsel. Brian looked thinner, his confidence eroded by weeks of questioning and suspended accounts. Nina appeared rigid, her posture stiff with contained anxiety. The proceedings began with financial evidence. Ethan Park took the stand first. He explained transaction timelines methodically. Dates Lydia's passport showed exit stamps contrasted against local purchase timestamps. Multiple withdrawals occurred, while Lydia was documented overseas. Defense counsel attempted interruption. Shared marital spending. Ethan calmly displayed authentication logs. These transactions bypassed her two-factor verification. The override code was generated through recovery questions answered correctly. Those answers were personal history details accessible only to someone close to her. He paused, or someone who obtained them deliberately. Next came vendor testimony, store managers confirming who presented the card. Surveillance footage played on the courtroom screen. In one clip, Nina signed a receipt. In another, Brian carried electronics into a car. The defense shifted tactics, accusation. They called Brian to testify. He described months of suspicion, late trips, unanswered calls, alleged affairs. His voice carried genuine hurt. The narrative he had lived inside for so long, now spoken publicly. Carla stood for cross-examination. Mr. Carter, she began evenly. Did you ever verify any alleged affair directly? He hesitated. No, but did you confront your wife with proof? She would have denied. So you had no evidence, Carla said, not raising her voice. Yet you accessed her financial accounts repeatedly. He swallowed. I believed she was betraying me. Carla walked closer to the jury box. Belief does not authorize impersonation, nor does it permit moving another person into property you do not legally own. Brian's eyes flickered. Then Nina testified. Her confidence returned briefly as she described concern for Brian's emotional well-being, portraying herself as a supportive colleague misinterpreted as malicious. Carla waited until she finished. Then she displayed a printed message log. Ms. Doyle, you initiated private communication with Mr. Carter using confidential HR contact information, correct? Nina paused. Yes. You told him Lydia extended trips she never extended. I might have misunderstood. Carla placed travel clearance forms beside the messages. Dates mismatched perfectly. No misunderstanding, Carla said. You fabricated situations that provoked distrust. Shortly after, you used Lydia's financial accounts. Silence filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward slightly. Aaron Doyle, the detective, testified last, outlining the investigation, confirming no evidence of Lydia's infidelity was ever found, and detailing how the spending pattern indicated coordinated activity. By the end of the day, the narrative that once existed only in Brian's mind had collapsed under documentation. The jury received the case. They left the room. Lydia remained seated, hands folded calmly in her lap while the courtroom murmured around her, waiting for a decision that would determine whether betrayal stayed private or became punishment. The jury returned just after noon the following day. The courtroom rose as they entered, 12 ordinary people who, over hours of testimony and documentation, had been asked to untangle emotion from evidence. By now, the spectators were quieter than they had been all week. Even curiosity had given way to tension. Brian stared straight ahead, jaw locked, hands clasped tightly together. Nina's fingers pressed against the edge of the defense table, her composure thinning under the weight of waiting. Across the aisle, Lydia remained still, her attention on the judge rather than the jury. She had already read the evidence many times. The outcome, to her, had been determined long before this moment. Not emotionally, but procedurally. The foreperson stood. On the charge of financial fraud and unlawful conspiracy. The pause stretched. We find the defendants, Brian Carter and Nina Doyle, guilty. The words did not echo loudly, yet they settled heavily across the room. Brian exhaled sharply, as if struck in the chest. Nina's shoulders dropped, disbelief overtaking the confidence she had tried to maintain for weeks. Their lawyer leaned toward them immediately, whispering next steps that no longer held much meaning. The judge reviewed the findings and spoke carefully, addressing not only legality but intention. The evidence presented demonstrates deliberate deception, calculated misuse of private information, and coordinated financial exploitation. Personal grievance or suspicion does not justify criminal conduct. He looked toward the defendants. You acted with planning, not impulse. Sentencing followed shortly after. Both defendants are hereby sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. The gavel fell. No shouting followed, only quiet reactions. Brian stared at the table, motionless, while officers approached. Nina's expression finally fractured, panic replacing calculation as reality replaced assumption. Across the aisle, Lydia did not react outwardly. She closed the folder on her lap, stood, and stepped aside to allow the officers to pass with the 2 people who had once occupied her home. Brian looked at her as he was escorted away. She met his gaze without anger, without relief, only closure. 12 months changed the property more than the betrayal had. The house no longer held the same furniture arrangement, nor the same purpose. Lydia walked through empty rooms one last time before handing the keys to the buyer's agent. The hibiscus plant, now larger, sat in a ceramic pot near the doorway, waiting to be loaded into her car. She paused briefly in the living room, not remembering the night of the lawn, remembering the life before it. Then she left. The sale finalized that afternoon. But Lydia's life had already moved forward long before the paperwork completed. Within the year, Westbridge Continental promoted her to Regional Operations Director, a role requiring oversight across multiple countries rather than a single office. Her reputation had strengthened rather than weakened. The case had demonstrated discipline under pressure, not distraction. Yet her most meaningful work happened outside corporate walls. 3 months after the trial, Lydia established a nonprofit organization focused on victims of financial abuse, individuals whose partners manipulated access, identity, or resources to control them. Many cases never reach court simply because victims lacked documentation, legal guidance, or the confidence to act early. She designed the organization differently. Legal literacy workshops, confidential accounting reviews, emergency advisory lines staffed by volunteer attorneys. Carla contributed pro bono hours. Ethan developed simplified financial tracking templates ordinary people could understand. Even Detective Aaron occasionally lectured about evidence preservation, teaching people how to protect themselves before damage escalated. Lydia never advertised her own story publicly within the foundation. She only explained procedures and options. The purpose was not sympathy, but prevention. Attendance grew steadily. One evening after a seminar, a woman approached her quietly and said, "I thought I was imagining it until I learned what patterns look like." That was enough. Her personal life shifted more gradually. Trust rebuilt not as optimism, but as informed choice. She no longer confused silence with peace or reassurance with honesty. Months passed before she allowed companionship beyond professional conversation. The man she eventually dated worked outside her corporate sphere, a civil engineer involved in public infrastructure projects. Their conversations rarely involved work schedules, and neither needed to monitor the other's movements to feel secure. He never asked why she kept meticulous financial records. She never needed to explain. Their relationship grew through ordinary routines, shared dinners after long days, discussions about city planning, occasional travel where neither suspected the other's absence. Stability, this time, was mutual rather than assumed. On the anniversary of the verdict, Lydia stood outside her new office, a modest building housing both her nonprofit and a small consulting unit she had launched independently. The sign bore a simple name, Clear Ledger Initiative. Inside, volunteers prepared documents for the week's appointments. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder she had set a year earlier, "Move forward." She dismissed it, not because it was no longer relevant, but because it had already happened. Lydia entered the building, greeted staff, and began reviewing case files waiting on her desk. Individuals seeking clarity before problems hardened into damage. The past had not vanished. It had been processed, documented, and concluded. And for the first time since the night rain soaked her belongings on the lawn, her life was defined not by what had been taken, but by what she now ensured others could keep.